When it comes to gifting, everyone on your list deserves something special. Luckily, Marshall's buyers travel far and wide, hustling for great deals and amazing gifts, so you don't have to. That means your mom gets that cashmere sweater, your best friend, that Italian leather bag. Your coworkers unwrap their favorite beauty brands, and your nephews, the coolest new toys. Go ahead, at prices this good, you can grab something for yourself too. Marshalls, we get the deals, you gift the good stuff. Shop now at marshalls.com or find a store near you.
Apartment People, champion, the trusted name in Columbus living, brings you the District at Berkshire.
Man, it will be fun to live there, right by Tanger Outlet Malls. Oh my God, great location too, getting to and from Columbus, and a great deal right now.
Free rent until next year. Free rent until next year.
He ain't lying. Move in now. You don't pay rent until next year.
The District at Berkshire. Available now at livewithchampion.com. That's livewithchampion.com. That's livewithchampion.com.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 586, Operation Corkscrew. By May of 1943, the Americans, soldiers and officers, had come a long way in regards to their own abilities and dealing effectively with those of the enemy. Not that C&C Alexander was ready to credit them the equal of the British troops, but they were getting there. Alexander's view of the Americans was shared by others of His Majesty's service, thus some Brits believed it would be best to have only British troops attack Sicily. But there was no way that Eisenhower, General Marshall, nor FDR was going to let that happen. This might not be the cross-channel attack that Marshall wanted, but whatever was going to happen, the Americans were definitely going to be involved. And benefiting from the planning phase of the attack, London had already been thinking about invading Sicily since November of 1940. The idea being to split Italy away from Germany. But besides Britain's still relatively weak power at the time, it was Germany's potential response that held back the British War Cabinet. But by 1943, things had changed, one of them being the imperfect participation of the Americans. By 1943, not only had the disaster at Stalingrad taken place, not only was Tunisia and the larger North Africa held by the Allies, but the Americans and British, for all of their arguments during and after Operation Torch, had worked out the larger strategy of how to take on the Axis partners. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff would lead in the Pacific Theater, the British Chiefs of Staff would lead in the Indian Ocean and the Middle East, leaving the combined Chiefs of Staff, the Americans and the British working together to direct the war in Europe, the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean. And for all of its imperfections and coming clashes, had the Axis partners worked this closely, the war could have lasted much longer. To understand the coming Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, that requires the understanding of the birth of Torch. FDR wanted American troops in the fight ASAP, and he agreed with Churchill's peripheral strategy of fighting on the edges while bombing the German homeland. But the men in uniform under FDR were split as to their priorities. Admiral Ernest J. King, who held the dual posts of Chief of Naval Operations and C&C of the U.S. Navy, had a Pacific First policy, which had a kind of sense. Japan did attack the U.S., not Germany. It would put massive resources into King's hands, and his ego felt good about that, but the last reason was less than kind. One of his justifications for a Pacific First policy was that the U.S. could not allow the white man's countries of Australia and New Zealand to be taken by Japan because of the repercussions among the non-white races of the world, i.e., it might get into their heads to do the same thing. But General George C. Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army and the man guiding this war for the United States, as FDR did not see himself as Churchill saw himself, would change the admiral's mind. First, Germany, which would keep Soviet Russia in the war, and then Japan. So Europe it was, In the summer of 1942, the first GIs were shipped to Britain for an eventual cross-channel invasion, while Torch allowed the Americans to test themselves while helping Britain take North Africa, changing the game in the wider Mediterranean. And as touching General Marshall's desire to attack directly the Axis back in 42, here was a chance to do just that, to take the fight to the enemy's home territory. But exactly where should the Allies attack, Sardinia or Sicily? Sardinia offered several advantages. Due to its location, its occupation directly threatened Rome, which had just lost 40,000 troops in Soviet Russia. To take Sardinia set up taking Corsica, immediately to the north, which would allow the Allies to threaten southern France or Italian factories in the northern half of the country. However, any invasion of Sardinia would have to be done with limited fighter protection due to range, and the Axis powers had shown what land-based fighters could do in the Mediterranean as Britain tried to keep Malta supplied, whereas Sicily was within range of Allied fighters based in Tunisia. The selection of Sicily was made official at the Casablanca Conference of January 1943. Again, General Marshall wanted a cross-channel invasion into northern France in 1943, but General Alan Brooke, chief of the British staff, countered that the Western Allies were not strong enough for a direct attack as yet. No, to continue operations in the Mediterranean was feasible, as we are here now. It would maintain the momentum we have built with our Tunisian victory, and it would be a big enough operation to force Germany to divert manpower to this theater away from other places, hopefully Russia. Marshall, certainly open to a solid justification, agreed, provided that the troops earmarked for the cross-channel invasion were not used. As for what came after Sicily, Marshall's attitude was, we'll see, as in no further operations in Italy should be considered guaranteed. And this was agreed to, so Sicily it was, and General Dwight Eisenhower was appointed to command the Allied Forces headquarters for the campaign. And one of the first issues that Eisenhower brought up was the stepping stones to Sicily, i.e. the small islands around Sicily, like Pantelleria, almost a dead center between Tunisia and Sicily, which had been fortified thanks to Mussolini back in the late 1930s. This was Mussolini's answer to Malta and Gibraltar. Indeed, the German and Italian aircraft based there had made life hard for the convoys going to Malta or North Africa. Further, Pantelleria, given its location, was sure to give a warning to the troops on Sicily when the attack came. Thus, these smaller islands had to be taken. But General Harold Alexander, Allied Army commander, and recently the CNC that had taken Tunisia, pointed out the island's mostly cliff-line edges, with its one good landing area sure to be heavily defended, meaning massive Allied casualties, and it wasn't even blood that would be spilt for Sicily. Be that as it may, Eisenhower wanted Pantelleria and the islands of the Pelagic Group to the southwest of Sicily captured. Most certainly Lampedusa, as radar based there could track ships heading to Sicily, not to mention the island's naval bases. Besides, if the Allies possessed the airfields on Pantelleria, that would allow them to better protect the group attack on Sicily. But between conserving time and resources, it was hoped to bomb the Axis troops on Pantelleria into surrendering, thus negating having to execute an amphibious landing. Thus was born Operation Corkscrew. Hey everyone, Ray here. Let me make your life a little easier and introduce to you your next binge-worthy podcast. In the fall of 1620, a battered merchant ship called the Mayflower set sail across the Atlantic. It carried 102 men, women, and children, risking it all to start again in the New World. Every week on American History Tellers, host Lindsey Graham takes you through the moments that shaped America. In our latest season, we explore the untold story of the Pilgrims, one that goes far beyond the familiar tale of the first Thanksgiving. After landing at Cape Cod, the Pilgrims forged an unlikely alliance with the Wampanoag people. They helped survive the most brutal winter they had ever known, laying the foundation for a powerful national myth. But behind the story lies another, one of conflict, betrayal, and brutal violence against the very people who helped them survive. Follow American History Tellers on the WWII app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of American History Tellers, The Mayflower, early and ad-free right now on WWII Plus. This terror from on high, unless the island surrendered, would be carried out by Lieutenant General Carl Spatz's North African Strategic Air Force of 4 B-17 heavy bomber groups and 5 medium bomber groups with fighter escorts. Again, trying to show Stalin something quickly, as the cross-channel invasion was not going to happen in 1943, the bombing of Corkscrew commenced on May 18th. Or rather, the island was already experiencing bombing attacks on its pillboxes and 21 gun batteries, along with its 12,000-strong defensive force, but on May 18th, all of that was massively stepped up. Between the 9 bomber groups, there was always a minimum of bombing sorties each day, yet the first phase was mostly carried out by the medium bombers, giving the enemy a chance to give in. As this did not happen by June 1st, on that day, the heavy bombers took part as well. The civilians, about 12,000 in all, experienced hell on the daily. By June 6th, there had been more than 1,700 sorties, dropping 1,300 tons of bombs. The Allies had chosen June 11th as the day to assault the island with troops, thus between June 7th and the 11th, another 5,425 tons of bombs were dropped, and weather permitting, the attacks were around the clock, with special attention paid to the coastal batteries. Adding insult to injury, on June 8th, the Royal Navy joined in with its bombardments. The Allies again asked late on June 10th, would the island surrender? No answer was forthcoming, so the British 1st Division set out from North Africa to the island. During all this, Rome could not send help, but did not allow Admiral Gino Pavesi, the island's commander, to surrender. He and his were expected to fight to the last, as if that would have made a difference. On June 2nd, Pavesi had told Rome the situation was hopeless. Late on June 10th, he said any defense of the island was practically finished. On the morning of June 11th, the British were coming. Not that Pavesi knew this. Still, he told the Supermarina, the Italian High Naval Command, that he would request surrender terms. At 10 a.m. that June 11th, the ships of the Royal Navy could be seen approaching the island. But as she had been so heavily bombed for weeks, smoke still came from the island's rubble. The bombing was stopped to let the smoke clear. Then the British troops would go ashore. The transport ships approached the port facilities. A few shots were taken at the British, who fired in return. Then the firing from the island stopped. Admiral Pavesi finally had heard from Rome. The island was given permission to surrender. The British commandos rushed ashore, expecting something, which is not what happened. They were told of the surrender by locals and Italian troops who had their hands up, and they passed this up the chain of command. Nearby, on the flagship HMS Aurora, General Eisenhower and Admiral Cunningham watched the non-battle unfold. The next day, June 12th, Lampedusa and the 2 small islands nearby also surrendered. Reading the tea leaves of this Allied attack, Axis tactical commanders believed that Sicily was next, but Rome thought it was Sardinia, and Berlin, giving in to its own fears like the first 2, believed that Greece and Sardinia were next on the list. Either way, for the Allies, Phase 1 was complete. Which was all well and good, but the greatest fear of Operation Husky was not failure, but how many men would be lost even before they could land on Sicily. The Mediterranean theater had quite clearly shown that Axis land-based bombers and torpedo aircraft could inflict significant ship losses on the invasion fleet, specifically the transport ships that would be approaching shore. All told, Allied intelligence guessed that the Axis had about 840 German and 1,100 Italian aircraft in the Sicily, Sardinia, southern Italy area, but as for Sicily, there was about 545 German and 250 Italian aircraft ready to defend. With these estimated numbers of planes, Allied planners expected to lose about 300 ships, in total, all kinds. This was completely unacceptable, and it shook the planners' confidence. The threat had to be reduced, so an Allied air campaign to negate the Axis air campaign during the invasion was put into action in May. Wanting to hit hard and expecting losses of their own planes while attacking, U.S. Army Air Force bombers, specifically B-17 heavy bomber groups bound for Britain, were diverted to the Mediterranean. First, starting in May, the main targets were the air bases on Sicily and Sardinia. But as the days went by, airfields on the Italian mainland and in Greece were added to cover the true target. Of course, the added benefit was the destruction of German or Italian planes in general, no matter their base. It would be best for Husky if the enemy, in general, suffered a reduction of fighters and bombers in the theater, for who knew what the future held. Then incorporated into the list of targets was the docks and ferry crossings of the Messina Straits that would bring reinforcements from Italy to Sicily. And starting on D-8, so July 2nd, Sicilian attacks became more frequent, but were balanced out with attacks on any airfield within range of Sicily. During the day, American B-17 and B-24s attacked, replaced during the night by RAF Wellington long-range medium bombers. At first, the Luftwaffe, in reaction, moved their aircraft to satellite airstrips, but these were found and hit as well. In fact, by the time of the invasion, the main airbase, Gerbini, in eastern Sicily, and its 12 satellites were mostly unusable. In the end, the Axis only stayed on 2 airfields, though still enduring bombing attacks, Sciacca in the northwest and Trapani on the west coast of Sicily, respectively. Given all this, the Luftwaffe pulled their fighters and bombers from Sicily completely by the second week of July, but by then, the damage had been done. The Axis overall had just lost 227 aircraft, while on the ground, with Sicily suffering 113 planes destroyed, with another 119 damaged. Clearly, the Allies were up to something. They would be renewing their advance somewhere in the area. What the Axis partners needed now was to focus on the larger issue of deflecting whatever was coming. It was time for everyone to be pulling on the same oar, which is not what was happening. As bad times truly test any relationship, Italy and Germany were staring at each other with distrust and some distaste in their eyes. Berlin believed the Italians were about to pull out of the partnership, much like during the Great War, while the Italians hated the Germans' domineering attitude. Were all Germans like Rommel, pushy, brash, uncouth? Meanwhile, lingering in the back of Italian minds was the thought, would Germany, out of desperation, outright occupy Italy? Mussolini must have thought so. Early in 1943, General Ugo Cavaliero was the Italian Supreme Commander, and he worked well with the Germans, certainly during Rommel's dashes across the North African desert. But on February 1st, 1943, Mussolini sacked Cavaliero and replaced him with the German-hating General Vittorio Ambrosio. From the get-go, Ambrosio publicly stated that the Axis needed to abandon offensive operations along the Eastern Front. It was time, he said over and over, to go on the defensive. Let the enemy bash their heads against us while the Axis regrouped. This was ignored, obviously, by Berlin, but it increased tension between the two Axis countries.
You should tell the people who we are and what our new show is.
I'm Robert Smith, and this is Jacob Goldstein, and we used to host a show called Planet Money.
And now we're back making this new podcast about the best ideas and people and businesses in history.
And some of the worst people, horrible ideas, and destructive companies in the history of business. We struggled to come up with a name, decided to call it Business History.
You know why?
Why?
Because it's a show about the history of business. Available everywhere you get your podcasts.
But Mussolini wasn't done. In other commands, more anti-German personnel were appointed, to the point that Berlin took notice. To wit, Mussolini sacked his own foreign minister and his son-in-law, Count Ciano, as it was discovered, shock that he was trying to build a consensus of important Italians to make a separate peace with the Allies. But this move by Mussolini was a smokescreen, as Ciano was not punished but appointed Mussolini's representative to the Vatican. But the cracks starting to show were not just between the two countries. The entire Italian military structure was based on independent command for those seeking power, or glory, or both, while the German structure was about control, to better focus the men, ships, panzers, and planes of Nazi Germany. Again, the Italians, not so much. Before General Mario Roatta was made Chief of Staff in late March 1943 to implement his idea of a unified command, the Army did not control the anti-aircraft fire on Sicily, and the naval and air force units on the island were also autonomous. But try as he might, and because he had sincerely tried, Roatta's ideas and his command were short-lived, as some traditions are harder to break than others. He blamed the local Sicilians for his lack of progress. In Roatta's place was now General Alfredo Guzzoni, who got along with the Germans, and though on paper he was in command of all German and Italian forces on Sicily, the Germans decided for themselves, after each of his orders, whether they would follow them or not. Of course, over them all was General Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the senior commander south, appointed by Hitler himself and given his own head on how to deal with the Western Allies. Fortunately for the Axis, Kesselring was experienced, competent, and optimistic. That last one, something the Axis definitely needed at this moment. But again, the 1 million Reich mark question was, where would the Allies strike? Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. Yeah, so we're off and running with Operation Husky. So let's jump into this. Let's see here. For his donation, I would like to thank Shraga Brewer. I'm not sure where you're from, but thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. The latest member is Matthew Schweers, if I got the last name right, from Chesapeake, Virginia, a local boy. Thank you, Matthew. And as far as the new thing that I've started, I would like to give credit to the producer Adam Dach from Cambridge, Wisconsin. Thank you very much, Adam, for joining up. And as far as the executive producer level, I would like to thank Andrew Grossman from Astoria, New York. And you can find this all on the website, WorldWar2Podcast.net. Just click on shop. There's a new coffee mug if you wanted to buy one. It's just got the logo of the podcast itself. And then there's a couple of levels of producer. And I think that, and then you can also gift membership for 1 year to someone if you are so inclined. So anyway, so just check that out if you want to. Thank you to all these gentlemen who have helped with the show. And I will see you soon with the next episode. So let's get, let's get Patton and Montgomery heading towards Sicily. Take care, everyone.